Greetings, race community. Brent coming in live from snowy Tucson, Arizona, as my family and I continue our RV adventure around the country. It did, in fact, snow here yesterday, which is not what we signed up for, but we're rolling with it, having a lot of fun, and I am really excited to welcome Dr. Marc Barnes, who's the Vice President of Institutional Advancement at Dillard University, to the show today. Welcome, Dr. Barnes.
How are you today? Thanks for having me.
Hey, I am doing great, and I'm thrilled to host you and to hear more about your story. And one of the things that I've enjoyed hearing about, given our collective and mutual work in the higher education advancement sector, is hearing from our guests about your own higher education journey. So I want you to take me back to 17-year-old, 18-year-old Marc, and tell me a little bit more about what led you to your own undergraduate experience at Xavier University of Louisiana.
Sure. And actually, my first choice was actually LSU. I wanted to go where the football team was, and to have that whole experience. My mom actually convinced me to think about Xavier. One, because I had grown up in Catholic schools. Xavier is a Catholic institution, and she kind of wanted me to continue that tradition. I was ready to break away from that tradition. But she kind of led me to that. And then she wanted me to go to an HBCU. So that was also important to both of my parents. And my older brother, had gone to LSU. He did not have a great experience. So she thought that would also be my experience. So I let my mom convince me to apply to Xavier, and I was accepted, and I could not have made a better choice. It was I decided going to Philadelphia. It was a great choice. I had a great undergraduate experience.
And my understanding is you studied marketing. Was that an easy choice? How did you gravitate to that? And I'd love to know about some of the, formative experiences you had that make you feel so strongly about that choice.
It actually was not an easy choice. It wasn't even my first choice. So growing up, I thought I was going to be a priest. I thought about being a priest as a kid, and then I learned the definition of celibacy. So I decided that wasn't going to be the route for me. So then my career goal focused then on being a lawyer. So I actually went in as an English major with the intent on going to law school. It was about maybe a semester in before I realized that I did not like English as a major. And I suffered through it maybe another semester, and then I decided to change my major to business with a focus on marketing. When I was exploring potential major changes with my advisor, we looked at something like sociology, we looked at business fields, and really my advisor did a really good job of asking questions about what it is I was interested in, what did I like. And she really guided me toward business with the concentration in marketing. So it ended up being a great decision. It was great advice from my advisor at the time. So that's really how I got into it. It wasn't my first choice, but it was the right.
And so as you advance through the program and senior year starts to approach and so forth, how did you think about the career path having, a big pivot from the priesthood to business and marketing to kind of what happens next? What was the immediate path? Because you didn't start in advancement right upon graduation.
No.
It took a while to kind of get here. So yeah, tell us more about that journey.
Yeah, so initially I thought I was going to go to graduate school, maybe get an MBA or some kind of a master's degree. I was working in retail at the same time I was in undergrad. So I was working actually I had two jobs. One was at a school uniform retail store, and one was at a sports shop. We sold like sports paraphernalia and clothes. So the job at the school uniform store actually gave me a promotion. I was in a supervisory role. and I was making a little bit of money. So I decided to do that instead. And then right after that, I did that for maybe a year or so after graduation. And I got called by Vanity Fair Corporation to work at their store in Texas. And so I was going to work at, they have an outlet mall that's called VF Factory Outlet. So I was going to work as one of the managers in one of their stores. And I did that for about a year. Went to Texas and did that. They wanted to send me to Seattle, Washington, or a town right outside of Seattle. And I went there for a few weeks and I just hated it. Didn't like it there. It was drab. I just, sorry for the people in the Seattle area. It's a great city. I love Seattle, but I just didn't want to live there as a 20-something-year-old kid. It was too far away from home. I'm from New Orleans. My whole family's in New Orleans. It just wasn't a good setup for me. So I asked the company if I could just stay where I was. They did not give me the option to do that. It was all or nothing. So I took nothing. And I called my parents and said, hey, look, I think I need to resign from this and come back. And so, of course, parents being parents, my dad helped pack me up and brought me home. And so then it was, now I don't have a job. And trying to figure out what I was going to do next. There's a bank in New Orleans. They actually spread out in several states now, but it's an African-American owned and operated bank called Liberty Bank. Hired me as a teller. And it was a journey that I will never forget. So I started there as a teller. And honestly, I took the job because I needed to make some money. I had student loans starting to roll in. I had a car note, and these bills starting to come. So I needed a job. So I figured I'd do that until I found something else. Well, I love banking. I fell in love with banking like the moment I walked in the door. And so I told my boss, I'm going to shout her out. Her name is Ann Duplessis. Ann was phenomenal to me. And I told Ann that I really can see myself doing this. And she said, well, you're going to have to figure out how to learn the other aspects, but not slip on your teller work. So I would, balance my drawer at the end of the day as fast as I could. And then I'd go sit on the platform and figure out what they were doing. After about 6 months, I got promoted to the platform. And so that was fun. I did that for about another 6 months. And then Ann put me in a management training program that lasted about a year at the bank. So I went through all the different aspects of banking, from the retail management side to loan underwriting, credit reviews. It was just, I went through the whole gamut. We settled in on putting me in as a branch manager. So I don't think I was a 26 or 27-year-old branch manager at the bank. And the branch that they assigned me to happened to be across the street from Dillard University. And so I was the banker for many of the people who were at Dillard, including a relatively new president named Dr. Michael Lomax, and his vice president for advancement at the time, Love Collins. From there, as their banker, they would come in the bank and talk to me all the time. Love Collins was talking to me. Maybe I had probably been a branch manager for several years at this point. Started talking to me about maybe doing fundraising as a career at Dillard. So I had two problems. One, I had no idea what fundraising as a career meant. Never heard of it. As an undergraduate at Xavier, I never interacted with anything called fundraising. I wasn't exposed to it. That was the first thing. The other thing was I went to Xavier. If you know anything about Dillard and Xavier, it's the crosstown rival. So it's like, there's no way I'm going to go and work at Dillard as a Xavier grad. So we had about 6 months of conversation of Love coming into the branch and talking to me about what it meant to work in higher education, what it meant to be a fundraiser. And I said, look, I do not want to beg people for money for a living. And Love's response to me was, every time I come in this bank, you always ask me, you know, do you need a loan application? Do you need a credit card application? He said, you ask me for money every time I come in here. He said, well, why not do that for somebody's life where it will really make a difference? And that was the thing that struck me. And how could I not, I mean, I didn't know how to say no to that. So I said, well, let's talk about it and let's see. So I came in and did a couple of interviews, and it captured me. I decided to give it a try. And here I am 21 years later, still doing it.
I love that backstory. Thank you for sharing. And I mean, I also commend the leadership team at Dillard. You know, the fact that you loved banking, you thought it was your life's work. You're a rising star branch manager. You know nothing about fundraising, and they're your arch rivals. It did not phase them
It did not.
to really to try to inspire you, and they must have seen something in you and in your work. So you kind of buy into the concept. What was it like once you made that move, where you had such a strong career path that it emerged after the Seattle kind of pivot? Was it the same kind of feeling when you moved to Dillard, when you moved to advancement, or you just felt like, no, now this is my life's work? Or was it rocky at the beginning?
It wasn't rocky. I can't say that I saw myself doing this as a long-term career when I first came in. But I will say that it didn't take long. So I was hired. The Kresge Foundation provided Dillard and several other HBCUs what they called at the time capacity building grants. And the whole goal was to help those institutions increase their fundraising infrastructures. So I was hired under that grant opportunity. But Kresge didn't just stop at providing the money. They also invested in training opportunities for all of the staff at those 5 institutions. And then they also selected 3 people from each of the institutions to be called what was called at that time Kresge Advancement Fellows, where they would get more intense training for a period of time. Well, I was selected as one of the 3 at Dillard to be a Kresge Advancement Fellow. So I wasn't just thrown into the fire and said, hey, go figure it out. I really received a lot of training. And it was specialized training. It was focused on our specific careers and career paths. So I would say after about a year, I really figured out that this is what I want to do. I don't want to leave this. I want to stay here and figure out where I go from here.
Could you tell me a little bit more when you think back to the Kresge Foundation kind of sponsorship, investment, capacity building? I mean, training is I think such a need in the sector, and it can be very ad hoc at certain shops. Others maybe have a real, the same way that you had a management training program at banks. I mean, I think banks have done a really good job of creating a structured way for an entry-level person who doesn't know that much about the sector, but has a good kind of general set of skills to get up to speed on all of those different areas. I don't know if we do it as well as the banks do in the advancement sector. It sounds like the Kresge Foundation filled some of that gap. When you think back to what stands out most, the before and after from that training experience, are there certain capacities or skills that they helped you build that otherwise it just might have been more difficult on your own?
I think the thing they did for me the most in that process was I came with the personality. And I think that is what attracted, Dr. Lomax and Love to me in the first place. They helped me figure out how to channel and use my personality with the technicalities of fundraising. And so it became a training of really the how-to in terms of, how do you manage an annual fund program? How do you identify, cultivate, and solicit major gifts? So we went through those kinds of trainings, but it was always with, you have the personality to do these things. And so I think what I got from the training in the program that Kresge put together was something that was very specialized for me. And it was based on who I am, based on my personality. based on my relationship building skills that they saw around me that were pretty natural.
Well, tell me more about that. I mean, when you say they helped channel your personality, what's an example of it not being channeled maybe as effectively or in the right way versus how they activated it or coached you in that regard?
Yeah, so a lot of it was role playing. So we did a lot of role playing, right? And so what in the process, what I learned was I have a lot of nervous energy, and they were able to identify that and say, look, you move around a lot, you swing a lot when you're walking, when you're talking. These are the things you need to make sure that you're sitting down when you're talking. You need to make sure that when you are standing up and making presentations, that you're maybe grabbing a podium. Like they gave me very technical things that can help me in terms of how I interacted with people. I have a tendency of talking pretty fast sometimes, especially when I get excited. So we talked about that. And how do you slow that down? How do you not talk as much and listen more? So those were the types of things that I got out of that program, as well as some of the technical things, like, we learned about data analytics and those types of things as well. But they really, we did a lot of role playing. So I was able to practice and hone those skills on in kind of real life situations, but also practice situations.
I'm curious if, well, first of all, I think it's just so valuable when you have somebody who can give you such tactical and constructive feedback where it doesn't hurt your feelings, where it's really just that coaching and shaping that we probably take for granted too often. I'm curious if that's shaped your leadership style at all. I mean, do you still bring role playing into your work at Dillard, or do you find yourself giving your colleagues as specific of feedback? Will you say to somebody, "Hey, grab the podium, you're kind of flailing around over there"?
Right.
I mean, did that make it easier for you to be more specific? Because I think sometimes it's hard to give feedback. It's hard to receive feedback. So I'm just curious your position on that.
That's a great question. So let me just be honest and say I don't do it as much as I probably should. We're a small shop. I try to do as much training as I can with the staff, and we do identify areas where I feel like people can do better and get better. But it's probably more reactive than it is proactive. So we don't come in and now you're putting something on my mind, and that's probably something I want to try to get started now. So that you've asked me that question, but I do give a lot of constructive feedback. Never in a threatening way. I absolutely love my team. So let me just start there. They're great, but there are always things that we can work on and improve. And so I'm pretty active about getting them that kind of feedback. I'm probably less active in terms of proactively saying, let's have some practice sessions. How are we going to do
right?
So that's a really good thing.
Yeah, look, I was thinking the same thing about my team. Honestly, I'm like, we have done role playing at times in the past, but it's been a while, and so I was sort of thinking to myself, maybe we need to bring that back a little bit. Maybe it's because of the Zoom world that we're all living in. Maybe that kind of put it to the side. But as it relates to giving your team feedback, I mean, do you have examples? You don't need to be too specific, or certainly not name names, but what's an example of maybe the kind of feedback that you've observed over the years as a leader that that maybe sometimes goes unsaid, where it might maybe frustrate a supervisor or a boss, but they don't actually say it out loud to try to remedy it because maybe they don't want to make it awkward or create tension or scare someone or whatever it may be? I mean, are there certain categories of feedback over the years where you've seen patterns that have emerged?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is communication skills. And for some people, that means written communication skills. And for some others, that means verbal communication skills. So what I try to do is provide really solid feedback on writing. So if somebody's presenting a grant proposal that has some content or technical deficiencies, I try to be very specific about what those deficiencies are, particularly when I see trends in their writing, so that we can improve those things for those individuals. the technical part is pretty easy because it's cut and dry. The content part is sometimes the kind of the tug and pull. If they don't agree with what I'm saying is probably more pertinent content or a different way to phrase the content. I've seen more resistance with that than I have with the technical writing feedback.
Do you have to remind them sometimes that you were an aspiring English major when push comes to shove?
That's right, I do. Yes, I do.
do you know who you're talking to here? I was an English major.
And my wife always
it.
marvels because she'll ask a question, or one of my kids will ask a question about something, and I'll go back and spout some English rule. And she's like, "How do you remember those things?" I was like, some people memorize and remember mathematical formulas. I remember English rules.
I love it. I love it.
But
I was just going to say, back to the career path a little bit. I mean, you went through that training with the Kresge Foundation. You had a really good run at Dillard, and then made a pivot into the more arts and music space, which sounds super interesting. And I know we want to talk a little bit more about that. But what prompted you? I mean, you're kind of I would call it a boomerang, where you went away and then eventually you came back, and we'll get to the return. But what was the catalyst after those 9 years at Dillard? I think now we're talking 2009, right, to say, you know what, this has been a good run. I've had a great experience. I've learned a lot, but I need to go and try something else.
I felt like it was time. I had been here, like you said, for 9 years. We had gone through the whole Hurricane Katrina experience in terms of rebuilding. So that kind of took a toll on me, just physically and mentally. I was tired. It wasn't that I wanted to get away from Dillard, because I love Dillard, but I thought it was time for my career to take a different turn. And I wanted to see what else was out there. So the opportunity actually came to me. Somebody told me about the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation looking for a director of development. And I saw it as an opportunity, number one, to learn something completely different than what I had been doing for the last 9 years. But also, I felt like it was the type of place in the type of job that could use my skill set. And I also thought that it would provide me an opportunity to really expand my horizons in terms of the people in the community I was coming across, who I was meeting on a regular basis. So it really was just an opportunity for me to pivot. I loved it at Dillard. Could have stayed at that time, but it was really just an opportunity to do something. And let's just be honest, it's the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. I mean, it's the New Orleans Jazz Fest. Like, what could be more exciting than that? I mean, it was going to be a really fun job. It's going to pay more money than I was making at the time. And it was going to be an opportunity for me to really learn something very different than what I had been doing for the last 9 years.
And just tell me a little bit more. I mean, you just touched on kind of being in the philanthropic sector, being anywhere in New Orleans during Katrina and the rebuild was unbelievably emotional and probably still really underappreciated. But I imagine when you think about some of the bright spots during such a challenging time, I mean, Jazz Fest had to be one of those bright spots, right? It had to be one of those areas where even in 09, 10, 11, as you were there, we're kind of in the midst of the financial crisis on top of the challenges with Katrina, but it had to be, pretty kind of inspiring to be a part of the good after there'd been so much focus on the bad and the challenges.
Yeah, that was actually part of the appeal. Nobody wanted to think a whole lot about, fun stuff for those first couple of years, but really, when we got to 2007, 2008, we were already just getting back to normal. The Jazz Fest never stopped. I mean, it kept going. And it really was, I would say, Mardi Gras and the Jazz Fest were really the two really bright spots of the year for people in New Orleans. And in addition to that, it was a bright spot for the economy, because it was still bringing in people from all over the world to come in and enjoy this. Some of the Jazz Fest best years in those years after Hurricane Katrina. So it absolutely was an opportunity to be someplace that provided a spark to the community. There was a really super cool project also that they wanted us to lead and to help fund. The foundation has a music school for children, and it's free for students. You can come there, you can pick up an instrument for the first time and learn how to play it, or you can be really good and get better. But it was free for the children of the greater New Orleans area. But it didn't have a home. We were using spaces at other schools around the city. The foundation had purchased some years before a funeral home that was right next door to its building. So it expanded the campus. It was an old abandoned funeral home and had been abandoned for a number of years. Raccoons and everything inside of it. And so, but they thought it would be a really cool space to put the new music school. So my job was to lead a campaign to find, to get the money to build this music school. So I was there for 4 years, and we had raised about 80% of the money by the time I left. And the music school was renovated and opened about a year after I left. So it was that was really cool to go back and see it. I'll tell you the other thing. When I left the Jazz and Heritage Foundation, I joined the board. So when I came back to Dillard, I joined the board of that foundation and stayed on that for a few years. And that was also a really cool experience. I still had an opportunity to watch the new school play out and come to fruition.
That's amazing. And congratulations on getting that over the finish line. I've got to ask, though, during that period, or maybe even since, as you've been involved with the board, what's your single favorite Jazz Fest memory?
Woo.
Is that a fair question? Am I allowed to even ask that?
No, it's a totally fair question. It's just one that's hard to answer. It's like by the time when you walk in the gate, it's a great time. But you know what? My favorite actually are the local artists. I know the Jazz Fest is really known now for having these big name artists, and they are really cool. They really draw great crowds. But my favorite is like sitting in the gospel tent and listening to church choirs. That is for me the Jazz Fest experience. I probably spend about 60% of my time in the gospel tent. Yeah, just listening to the local choirs. And they get into it. I mean, they prepare and they're really good. So I think my favorite experience is really watching that and eating. I love it.
Well, all right. Well, what's the one food we got to get when we go to Jazz Fest? And by the way, as we sit here in early 2021, speaking of being in the need of bright spots, who couldn't use a good Jazz Fest right now? So yes. I think we're all ready.
Yeah, we are so ready. They announced that they pushed it back to October, so we're looking forward to that. It's usually in April, last of April, beginning of May. So I'm going to recommend a couple of things for you. I'm going to recommend crawfish Monica. Crawfish Monica is a crawfish pasta type of deal. It's really, really good. Then I love the crawfish strudel. Obviously, I love seafood. And then there's a white chocolate bread pudding that is to die for.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Jazz Fest it's been on the bucket list, and really hopeful that everything is back going strong here this fall. But look, along the way, and I don't exactly know when it is on your journey, but you've been able to work with some pretty prominent philanthropists, and we love asking our guests what's the most memorable gift you've closed, or some of the most memorable people you've gotten to work with. We recently had a colleague from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, who got to work with Michael Jordan in regards to some philanthropic work there. But you've got a pretty big name yourself. So you want to tell me a little bit about that highlight, when that happened?
Before I do that, if you don't mind, I do want to mention and remember Hank Aaron. Hank Aaron was also very supportive of Dillard University, a friend of the school, somebody I got to know over the years, and we just lost Mr. Aaron. So I do want to acknowledge that because he was a phenomenal supporter of not just Dillard, but a lot of HBCUs. So I just want to acknowledge him and to say how much we are going to miss Hank Aaron. He was a great baseball player. He was a better person. But my well Ray said. Charles, thank you. My Ray Charles experience was clearly for me the most memorable. So it started when I got here. I was kind of the low man on the totem pole, as they speak, right? So Ray Charles was brought in to be our commencement speaker. I believe this was in like 2003. So my job was to get in the limo, meet him at the airport, and make sure he got to his hotel. That was my job. Like I had to, be kind of the local escort. So, Ray Charles flew on his own private jet. So those don't typically fly to New Orleans International. There's a smaller airport here in the city where they go. So I'm in the limo. We drive on the tarmac after the plane lands. And I meet Mr. Charles and his team right at the airplane door. And he's like, as I said, I'm Mark Barnes. I work at Dillard University. And I'm going to show you around, make sure you have everything that you need. Any questions you have, make sure hey, man, you want to see my airplane? It's like, sure. Like the first thing we did was a tour of his airplane, and he gave me the tour. So we get in the car, and we were friends before we got to the hotel. It was I'll never forget. It was Mr. Charles, his longtime assistant Joe Adams. There's a gentleman by the name of Carl who was his handler, and Valerie Urban who was his assistant. And so we had a really good time that entire weekend. And Mr. Charles said, you know what, we're going to do something for Dillard. They actually came back a little while later, maybe a few months later or something. And they came back and he said, there's a program, we talked about this culinary type program that he wanted to do. His concern was that he called us the microwave generation. He said he spent a lot of time in New Orleans where he had the best food he had ever eaten. And he was afraid that the culture of food was going to die because, my generation was, doing the quick and easy stuff and microwaving our food and this kind of thing. So he really was concerned about that and wanted to see the culture of food survive. And that was something that was really up our alley anyway. So we talked about what that would look like, and he said, I'm going to give you $1 million to start this program. And we were like, okay, that's great. And so we put the program together based on his vision and got it launched. Shortly thereafter, he passed away. And when he passed away, Joe Adams took over the management of the foundation until he couldn't do it anymore because he was up in age as well. And then Valerie, who was then the assistant, became the president and CEO of the foundation. Valerie and I are really good friends today. And we always say if we had parallel careers because we both started at the bottom, and how you say started at the bottom and now we're here. And so, but we did that together. We kind of grew up together. So Valerie, even now, is really good friends. And since that first $1 million, they've given several more to Dillard. So they've given $4 or $5 million to Dillard over the years, even since Mr. Charles' first $1 million donation. It was a really fun experience. It turned out to be a really great relationship. I can remember a time when I went to Los Angeles to visit his studio, and he gave me a tour of his studio. And it's a 2-story complex that has a kitchen and all of that. He did everything himself. He made his own coffee. He fixed his own food. There's this huge soundboard. I mean, not your average soundboard. This thing is made this huge. He operated himself. And he told me, and then he had a suit closet that was just amazing because it was all of his suits, and he can point to each one and tell you what each suit was and the pair of shoes that went with the suit. it was just an amazing. I mean, he was really an amazing person. He said the only rule that he only had one rule in his building, is that you couldn't leave stuff on him. But other than that, people could do whatever they want. He didn't want people tiptoeing around him and treating him like he was different than anybody else, and you would never think he was. Just getting to know him. So he was a super fantastic guy.
Dr. Barnes, thank you for sharing. It's an amazing story. And I think for a lot of, for myself and for our listeners who maybe haven't had the opportunity to, be kind of on the inside for those sorts of conversations, it's just always really enlightening. I do have to ask, do you think when he showed up on his plane at that private airfield, the first time when you met him, before he gave you that tour, do you think he already had in the back of his mind that he'd be supporting Dillard? Or do you think it really emerged through the experience that he had?
That's a very good question, and one that I never thought to ask. Honestly, I think he may have thought that I would do something for Dillard. I don't think he had thought through what that might look like. I think the amount and the purpose emerged as the relationship. I suspect because we were giving him an honorary degree, he may have thought about doing something. He had supported other institutions. He supports Morehouse. He has supported another HBCU prior to us. So I think he probably thought he would do something. But I think what that looked like was not in his mind at the time.
Appreciate you sharing. And so we kind of just went back in time to the what an amazing early career success. I mean, that just had to be so incredible. You make the move, working with Jazz Fest, et cetera, but then ultimately did a little bit of consulting and then made the decision, or the opportunity was presented to come back to Dillard in a real leadership position. And you definitely did some continuing education of your own kind of along this chapter of the journey. But just tell me a little bit about fast forwarding from 2013 when you went back to Dillard, now as VP of Advancement, some of the things that you're most proud of. And obviously over the last year, there's been a variety of challenges that we've all, navigated. And certainly I think the HBCU community has been in more of a spotlight than ever on many fronts. And so I just love your perspective on kind of the second time around as you came back to Dillard.
So shout out to Dr. Walter Kimbrough, our president, for bringing me back. When at the time I was still actually working at the Jazz and Heritage Foundation, but also looking toward the future. Figuring out what was next. We had completed most of the campaign for the building, so I was really trying to figure out what was next. I started a consulting company just to thinking that may be the next move for me. When Dr. Kimbrough got here in 2012, he began to look for the VP at that time, who was actually my boss, decided to retire. And so Dr. Kimbrough started looking for a new VP, and I applied for it. And to be honest, that was the first job I had ever applied for. Everything else had kind of come to me, and people just hired me, with the exception of the teller position. But everything since then just kind of came to me. But I decided to apply to go back to Dillard. Honestly, I didn't think he'd bring me back because I'd already been there. But when I made the round of finalists, I felt like I had a good chance, but I wasn't sure. And I know that Dr. Kimbrough, contemplated that decision a lot because he didn't know me. And I knew of him, but didn't know him. So he really took a chance. Not knowing me, having not been in higher education for the past 4 years, and only having been at Dillard prior to that. So he really took a chance and hired me as the vice president. And what he's allowed me to do was really take this position and shape it, and make it into what I thought institutional advancement should look like at a higher education institution. So it's it's been a lot of challenges because, we don't have now the staff size that we had when we were under the Kresge initiative. So I'm coming back now with a smaller team than what I left. We're dealing with a number of challenges, just trying to figure out. When I got back, we were still putting together some of the buildings after Hurricane Katrina. And now we're talking, 12 years, 8 years after the hurricane. So we're still putting the campus back together. There's this huge loan that we took out, over $120 million loan that we took out from the federal government. The debt service on that was coming due, and it was going to just be really onerous. So there were all these issues that we were dealing with. At the same time, we were dealing with retention issues. We were nowhere. I think we were at something like 60% retention first to second year. Graduation rate under 50%. So there were a number of issues that we had to deal with and tackle. So Dr. Kimbrough and I, we talk a lot about what are the plans and how we're going to address these things. But we got to work. So I really want to say that tackling all of those issues, everything has been strategic, but it's also been entrepreneurial. So we've been able to just build new stuff and do things. I can say that we, in our work together, we were able to get that loan forgiven, which would clear, over $120 million off of our debt service, which we're a debt-free institution. We were able to start a fund called SAFE. It's called the Student Assistance for Financial Emergencies. When you ask me one of the things that I'm really proud of, I'm going to say that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of, which I'm most proud, because when we started that fund, it really was to address several students who were about to graduate who had balances. And had they not been able to pay those balances, they would not have been able to receive their degrees that they had worked so hard to get. So Dr. Kimbrough and I thought of this fund, this emergency. Yeah.
Just on that note, Dr. Barnes, can you tell me a little bit about, how that challenge, right? I mean, basically, these are kids, they're about to graduate, they've done the work academically, financially, they're in a tough situation.
Yeah.
How does that even land on your desk or on Dr. Kimbrough's desk? I mean, you've got a lot of different things you could raise money for.
Yeah. What
was the process? And did you get down to the level of even getting to know those students? I mean, I'm just curious to know about that human element here.
Great question. The answer to that question is, so when I'm talking about how we do things differently here and how we can be entrepreneurial, I would tell you that, if you look at an institutional advancement office and you talk about relationships with students, those two things don't usually go in the same conversation. That's not what it is here. I teach a class of freshmen. I mentor quite a number of the young men here, and I have I'm the administrative liaison to one of the members of the SGA. So Dr. Kimbrough's expectation is that we are all connected to our students. And that goes to, whether you work in student affairs, if you teach a class, or if you are the CFO. His expectation is that we all put our hands on students, because at the end of the day, their experience is what makes good a university. So because of that, I got to know quite a number of the students. And then we also do a lot of research. So, every decision that we make is a research-based decision. So getting to know the students, but then also understand. So that's how I knew that those seniors had those issues. That's how it got on my desk, because I knew them, and I knew that they were having it. And it came to me, and it was Mr. Barnes at that time. They were talking about the problems and not, the possibility of not getting their degree. And I was like, we have to do something. And so that's how.
Can I ask? I mean, what kind of, what's the balance we're talking about with some of those students?
$2,000, $2,500.
$2,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't solve that problem, they don't get the degree, they don't graduate. I mean, what happens?
They don't. I mean, really, they maybe, I don't think they can even walk. I mean, so they can't even walk without, because.
So you're just fired up. You're like, I know these kids.
Yeah.
I see this problem. They're good kids. We got to solve it.
That's right. And it was more than just those few. So that the whole thing was, those were symptoms, but not the bigger problem. The bigger problem, we had a lot of other students that, and we will let them carry these balances from year to year, but we really weren't resolving the issue. Then when it was time to graduate, it comes to a head. Or we were losing them and the retention rate is poor. And so the data that we had showed that we were actually losing more students due to financial issues than we were because of academics. And the average balance was somewhere in the neighborhood, to your question, about $2,500. So we started this fund initially with the intent to help those few seniors, but with the larger issue in mind that we have this kind of systemic problem that we need to deal with. And our alumni really jumped on this. Within the first year, we raised over $1 million, primarily from alumni. And then we started getting foundation support, other organizational support for it. So we've probably raised now about $4 million for this, and we've been able to help over 1,000 students. And wow. Our retention rate is now, I think, close to 90%. And our graduation rate is risen up to 50%. So it really has made a difference.
Wow. Can I ask, like, as you went out to make the case to alumni, I'm sure in some regards it was, broad-based efforts, but it had to be one-on-one conversations as well.
Yes.
How much did it matter that you could, and that your staff, like having that student to advancement connectivity? It's one thing to say, hey, look, we've got an issue, we've got a problem, financial pressures are challenging retention, they're challenging graduation rates, we'd like to solve that problem. It's another thing to say, and let me tell you about this kid, Mark, who's a senior, who is such a good, did you kind of, like, how do you get down to that next level of not just an abstract issue, but like there's a real person behind this? And did it give you more confidence in making the ask and your team doing the fundraising because you knew those kids on a personal level?
Yes, and I'll tell you, we took it even a step further, and we had the students meet the donors or the prospective donors. We had the students talk to the alumni, talk about their stories, that they can share their stories. We use videos on social media. Whenever we would have alumni gatherings, we would bring students in with us to talk about their stories. So we not only told their stories, but we allowed them to tell their own stories. And I think that's what really resonated with our alumni in particular. And then the other kind of, I won't say unintended consequence, because this is also very intentional, but the other result of this effort was when I got here, our alumni giving rate was about 4%. We brought it all the way up to 23. So it not only impacted the SAFE fund, but it impacted the alumni giving rate as well.
Incredible. It's incredible. And look, I think this also highlights one of the ongoing debates in the sector, which is, what do we want? We want unrestricted money. What are you talking about? You're talking about the most restricted, most specific problem-solving payment to support a kid. And I think that's where we're missing a lot of opportunity, because if you had just said, please give to the annual fund, versus let me tell you about this senior who's about to graduate, here's a video of that person, I'm going to include them in the meeting, and you, donor, can make the difference for this kid. That's the ultimate restricted gift. Yet I feel like we've been so averse to that sort of fundraising, but you're showing it can not only drive revenue, it can solve problems, it can grow participation. Why aren't we doing more of that all the time by default in this sector?
Yeah, and I think the other part of that conversation is we look at unrestricted giving so narrowly that we miss the opportunity to look at budget relieving. So something can be restricted, but also budget relieving. So, that if you think about the fact that those were very restricted gifts to the SAFE fund, but really that money served the exact same purpose as an unrestricted gift. So it helped relieve that's revenue that we would not have received otherwise, that still goes to the bottom line. So I think we have to get out of the very narrow thinking of purely unrestricted dollar and think about what's really budget relieving dollars, so that you can guide people to give to whatever their affinity is, because really giving is about what the donor wants to do, not about what we need. So if you can align the donor's desires to what the institution needs from a budgetary standpoint, even if those things are defined as restricted, they're still very helpful.
Well, and I have to imagine, I'm curious to know now, like in that range you're talking about, that $2,000, $2,500 kind of average balance, let's say, you've now got a really compelling price point, if you will, to go to somebody who maybe is given $100 on again, off again, and offer them a stretch opportunity into kind of a $2,000, $2,500 level, or to somebody who wants to have a bigger impact. It could be more, how many kids do you want to support? 10, 20, 30, 50. But I would imagine that, because sometimes people are like, what's the difference between my $100 gift or my $500 gift, my $2,500 gift? I don't know where it goes anyways. It's very different to be able to say $2,500 can solve this problem. That's a lot different than $2,500 will buy you the brick and the walkway.
Right. That's right. Yeah, no, you're exactly right about that. I can't even say it any better than you just did.
But do you have examples of people who, that kind of accessible donation level where it was maybe a stretch, maybe more than they'd done before, but because it was linked to such a concrete solution to a problem for a specific kid, did that make it easier for them to make that leap that they otherwise never would have done to a more generic appeal?
I'll give you this example. We have a donor. I'm not sure I should say his name, so I won't.
It's okay. Yeah.
But we have a donor who's been supporting us for a long time. He's a former trustee. And he'd give us about $100,000 a year. And we started talking to him about this safe fund. And what we decided to do, and what, in our conversations with him, and really it was his decision to do this, was he said, I will double my contributions to this, because we were able to show him how it had an impact. He said, but I also want you to use this as a challenge to your other donors. So if you can raise 200, I'll give you this 200, and you can use this money for the safe fund. And we did that, and actually that has now become the basis of our Giving Tuesday. And so we use that now as part of our Giving Tuesday campaign. And he has been phenomenal. It was because we were able to show him the impact of how many students he was able to help. And now that we've been doing this with him for several years, we can say now, look, these students are actually graduating because of it. So we definitely show that. And then the other thing that we show in terms of impact is when we lose a student who has a $2,500 balance, we're not just losing $2,500 in the student, we're also losing all the other revenue that student comes with. So really, when you make a $2,500 investment in a student, the leverage opportunity for that is really now about $22,000 to $25,000, because we're still retaining that other revenue that we would have otherwise lost had that student left the university.
Housing, dining, other activities, et cetera. Got it. Well, look, I think to everybody listening, the big takeaway here for me is, what are the budget relieving restricted gifts that could make a difference to your institution? It's not necessarily a clear trade-off. You might be able to find a way to do both. I do have to ask, to go from 0 to 4 million to impact over 1,000 students, you're not the only institution struggling with this financial pressure. Have others come to you and said, hey, we got to get our own safe fund? Why wouldn't every institution do a safe fund? And frankly, I think a lot of the student emergency funds we saw emerge during COVID sound a lot like what you all already had in place with your safe fund.
I think it's about how you cultivate it. And so, there are lots of schools that have funds like this. We certainly aren't the first. The key for us is how we were able to have our students participate in this process, so that people can really understand them. And I think it was also, I will say that we have a president who really understands communications, and who really understands how to leverage and harness social media. So a lot of this happened on our social media platforms and campaigns. And we were able to bring in a lot of our younger alumni as a result of So we have really good leadership that was 100% participative in this process. We have an outstanding team that know how to connect with our alumni in all kinds of different ways, whether it's on the telephone, by email, social media, going face-to-face visits. So we made a real campaigning effort out of this every year. So it wasn't like, we just put it out there and hope people would bite. It was something that we really managed as a campaign.
Yep.
And it's been successful.
I love it. Okay, last thing that I want to get your take on, and I want to be sensitive of time. Take me back to mid-December 2020 when you get the news that that Dillard is included in MacKenzie Scott's unbelievable philanthropy. That had to be a fun day, and I want to know about it, not just what it was like to find out, what it was like to talk about with Dr. Kimbrough and the staff, but also being a part of the HBC community, which you've referenced so many times on the episode already today. What was it like? I mean, you must have friends at different places. I mean, were the text messages flying? Are people FaceTiming? Just like, what was that like as a member of that community, both your own undergraduate experience and obviously professionally?
Yeah, it was, it's transformative. So I'll share with you that we learned about it in October. So we had to sit on this for a couple of months. And so
not everybody did, right? I mean, a lot of people just found out that day.
I think most of them. By the time she announced it, she had already doled out the money. So we had already received money. But we were sworn to secrecy. We could not share until she shared. So only a handful of us at the institution knew about it. So when we found out about it, we were just completely floored. I mean, we had not received a $5 million gift from an individual ever at the institution. But when we were able to release the information after MacKenzie Scott, did her piece about it in December, yeah, you're right. The floodgates opened. I got text messages, emails. People want to know, give me her number. I want to know how to get it too. I was like, look, let me just be honest with you. We did not solicit that. Now, that's the biggest gift I ever got from an individual, and I didn't ask for it. She had her own metrics, her own team that figured out, how they want to identify the organizations and institutions that she would support. And then, to this day, I've never talked to MacKenzie Scott. We've only talked to, through her, through the mechanism by which the money came to us. We've got communications about, reporting and those kinds of things. But it's transformative for us because not only did she give us $5 million, but she said, you do with it what you think is best for your institution. And I think that is a sea change in how philanthropy works. I am not going to be the one to sit here and tell philanthropists how to do their own philanthropy. But I will say that what she did was transformative in the amount that she gave and by the way she's allowing it.
It had to be just an unbelievable, just a
Yeah,
bright spot during.
It was a euphoria. It was absolutely a euphoria. After we picked our mouths up off the floor.
Yeah, I mean, look, like 2020, there have been some incredible lows and some amazing highs, like what you just shared. How do you feel as 2021 approaches? I mean, what are you excited about for the coming years? In the next chapter of your career, kind of what are the big ideas, the things that you're excited about, and then I definitely want to make sure that we let our audience know how to stay in touch with you after the episode.
Sure. I'm really excited about what's going to happen. The fact that all the stuff that we're dealing with in terms of social and racial justice has been because it's all kind of out there now for us to have these conversations. I really feel good that we are going to really move this country forward in terms of how we resolve some of these issues. I love that HBCUs are really now in the spotlight. I would say it's about time. We've been doing this now for over 150 years. And so it's finally people are recognizing us as viable institutions that are making a difference in not just higher education, but in the nation and in the economy. So I feel good that we are moving in the right direction. And what's going to happen in this country, I think, over time, is going to be a real change in terms of how we all view each other and how we all operate with each other. I think this is a really good time for HBCUs. HBCUs need to seize this moment and make sure that they're telling their stories and make sure that they are putting out there the great work that they're doing so that MacKenzie Scott can recognize all of us. And I would love to see that. So that's what I'm really excited about. I think there's a lot of hope, and I think we're all feeling it. We'll always be grateful when this pandemic is done so we can get back in our face-to-face meetings and visits. I do believe that we're heading in that direction.
Well, Dr. Barnes, thank you for such an inspiring conversation, for sharing your journey, the twists and turns along the way. And I share your optimism and hope. And I think that so many of the problems we're dealing with across different parts of society have to be addressed by way of education in general, and certainly through the HBCU community specifically. So thank you. How can our audience stay in touch?
Yeah, email me at mbarnes, MBARNES, at dillard.edu. You can find me on Twitter at Marc A. Barnes, and Marc is M-A-R-C, so M-A-R-C A. Barnes. And you can find me on Facebook at Marc A. Barnes as well. And I'm also on Instagram at Anthony Barnes.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm really hopeful someday that we're able to enjoy some crawfish Monica at Jazz Fest.
Yes,
all right.
I will host you at Jazz Fest.
All right, game on. Sounds great. Have a wonderful rest of the week. And with that, Brent signing off with Dr. Marc A. Barnes, the Vice President of Advancement at Dillard University. Thank you, Dr. Barnes. Cheers.
Thank you. I appreciate it.